My name is Ella. And if you had told me a year ago that my life would end up like this, living in a strange house with a new family, lying awake every night listening for footsteps that might or might not come, I would have laughed in your face. But life changes fast. One day you think you know who you are, where you belong. The next, you're a stranger in your own skin, in your own story. Some nights I feel like I'm still falling. I know how that sounds. Overdramatic. Like I'm the kind of girl who makes a big deal out of nothing. But you have to understand, I didn't just lose my old room or my routines or even the view out my window. I lost the feeling that someone out there was looking out for me. My dad left when I was 12, and for a while it was just me and Mom. We were okay, most days. We understood each other's silences. Then Mom met Steve, and everything changed. Steve was nice, I guess. A little stiff. He meant well, but he never really knew what to say to me. I mostly stayed out of his way. But the real surprise was his son, Mason, my stepbrother. Mason was different, older than me by a year, but he acted like he was miles ahead, like he'd already seen everything worth seeing and come back bored. He hardly spoke at dinner. He disappeared for hours on his bike, came home late, and barely nodded at me when we crossed paths in the hallway. At first, I told myself I didn't care. Why should I? He had his life, and I had mine. But then came the nights. The ones when the whole house felt heavy with words no one dared say out loud. That's when I started hearing him outside my door. The first time I thought I was imagining things. The old floorboards in the hallway creak under the slightest pressure, and the wind loves to howl through the eaves of this weird too-big house. But that night, when I was curled up under my blanket, phone screen lighting up my face, pretending not to listen, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, careful. Like someone was trying not to be heard. I held my breath. The steps stopped right outside my door. For a long second, all I could hear was my own heart pounding. Then, so quietly, I almost missed it. A knock. Just once. My hand trembled as I turned off my phone and stared at the dark ceiling. Who knocks at someone's bedroom door at midnight? I didn't answer. I couldn't. After a minute, the footsteps moved away. The next morning at breakfast, Mason didn't look at me. Mom and Steve were already arguing about something small, the way Steve folds towels maybe, or Mom leaving coffee rings on the kitchen table. Mason ate fast and vanished before anyone else had finished their toast. I thought maybe I'd dreamed it. Maybe the house was getting to me. Maybe I was just lonely. But that night it happened again. This time I sat up in bed, heart hammering, and called out, "Who is it?" Silence. Then Mason's voice, just a whisper through the door. "It's me." For a second, I just stared at the door, not sure what to do. I'd never talked to him this late or this close. Something about his voice made me shiver. Not with fear exactly, but with something I couldn't name. "Are you okay?" he asked. I swallowed. "Yeah, just can't sleep." He hesitated, and I heard the faintest scrape as he slid down. The wall, sitting on the other side of the door. "Me neither," he said. That was all. But for some reason, it meant everything. We didn't talk much that night, just a few words exchanged in the dark. I told him I missed my old room. He told me he missed his old life too, before everything got so complicated. From then on, it became a ritual. Every night, when the house fell silent and the lights were out, I would listen for his footsteps. Sometimes he'd just sit outside my door, saying nothing. Sometimes we'd whisper about the stupidest things, school, music, old movies, but always there was that door between us. Always, just close enough to know he was there. Some nights I wanted to open it, to let him in. To see if having someone next to me would chase away the cold, empty feeling that crept in after midnight. But I never did. Maybe I was scared of what would happen. Maybe I just didn't know how to cross that line. One night, after another silent dinner where everyone pretended everything was fine, I found myself waiting for him. I couldn't sleep. mind racing with 100 things I wanted to say but never could. I counted the cracks in the ceiling. I tried reading, then scrolling through my phone, then just lying there, staring at nothing. Finally, when the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming downstairs, I heard him. Footsteps. Slower than usual. He paused at my door, and for a long moment, I wondered if he'd walk away. Then, knock, knock. This time, I got up. I walked over to the door, pressed my palm against it. On the other side, I heard him do the same. "Can't sleep?" I asked, barely more than a whisper. "Not tonight," he said. "You?" "Never." I laughed, just a little. It felt good. It felt real. Mason stayed outside my door for a long time that night. I lay down facing the door and imagined I could feel his presence through the wood. Somehow, the world didn't seem so big or so scary when I knew he was there. Just close enough. It's strange, isn't it? How you can go from strangers to something almost like family in a matter of weeks. How a closed door can start to feel like a promise instead of a barrier. People say siblings are supposed to annoy you, to invade your space, to know exactly how to push your buttons. But Mason was different. He waited until the world was quiet, until I was alone, until I was in bed, then came so close I could almost hear him breathing. He never pushed, never pried, just stayed. I think that's what I needed most. That's how it started. The night everything changed. People always think the hardest part about moving is packing up boxes. They don't realize the real challenge comes later, when all the boxes are gone and you're left sitting in someone else's space, trying to remember how to breathe. The longer I stayed in that house, the more invisible I felt. At school, no. One seemed to notice I was new, unless it was to whisper about me in the hallway. At home, Steve and my mom fell into a routine of pretending we were already a real family. Sometimes I caught Mason watching me across the table, eyes sharp and unreadable, and I wondered what he saw. But at night, everything changed. It became our secret. The space just outside my door, where Mason would sit on the cold floor and whisper through the shadows. I never knew what time he would come. Sometimes it was just after midnight. Other times I'd be almost asleep before I heard his footsteps. But he always came. And I always waited. I started to memorize the sound of his knock. Soft, but never hesitant. He never forced his way in, never asked for more than I could give. Just that gentle tap, a question hanging in the dark. Some nights I left the door cracked open, just an inch or two. Not enough for him to come inside, but enough that I could see the outline of his sneakers, the faded knees of his jeans. He'd lean back against the wall and tilt his head, shadows making him look older, more tired. It was easier to talk when I couldn't see his face, easier to say the things that scared me. "Do you ever feel like you're just floating?" I whispered once, twisting a strand of hair between my fingers. "Like you're not really here?" Mason was quiet for a moment. "All the time," he said, and his voice was rougher than usual. "It's like I keep waiting for things to feel normal again, but they never do." Sometimes he'd bring things with him. A mug of tea, warm and sweet, an old deck of playing cards, a book he thought I'd like. He'd slide them through the crack in the door, never making a big deal out of it. I always acted like I didn't care, but those little gestures meant more than he could know. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me stories from his old school, how he once got detention for climbing onto the roof just to watch the sunset. I told him about my old best friend, how we used to sneak out and lie in the grass, counting satellites. I missed her so much it hurt. Some nights, when he was especially quiet, I wondered if he missed someone too. School was a different kind of battlefield. People already had their groups, their histories. I was just a name on a roll sheet. Ella Wright, the new girl with too many secrets and not enough answers. It didn't help that Mason was popular, in his own quiet way. The kind of person everyone wanted to be close to, but no one really knew. Rumors followed him like shadows. Some people said he used to get in fights. Others said he was brilliant, but didn't care. I never knew what to believe. At home, he was just Mason. The boy who waited until the world was asleep to let his guard down. One afternoon, after a particularly rough day, I came home to find Mason sitting on the porch steps, head in his hands. I almost walked past him, but something stopped me. "You okay?" I asked, careful to keep my voice low. He shrugged, not looking up. "Doesn't matter." I hesitated. In the daylight, everything felt more complicated. We weren't siblings, not really. We weren't friends, not exactly. But I couldn't just leave him there. "Do you want to talk?" I offered, echoing the words he'd whispered to me 100 times through the door. For a second, I thought he'd brush me off. But then he looked at me, really looked at me, and something in his eyes softened. "Maybe later," he said quietly. "Thanks, though." That night, he knocked earlier than usual. "I heard what happened at school," he said, voice muffled by the door. "People can be idiots." I sat with my back against the other side, knees pulled to my chest. "It's whatever. They don't even know me." "They will," he said. "Eventually." He hesitated. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But if it ever gets bad, I'll walk you to class. Just say the word." That offer, so simple, so honest, made my throat ache. I pressed my forehead to the door, eyes stinging. "Thanks, Mason," I whispered. "I mean it." We sat in silence for a while, just breathing. It was enough. As the days went by, our secret meetings became the best part of my routine. I started looking forward to bedtime, not because I wanted to sleep, but because I wanted to hear Mason's stories, his soft laughter, the way he could turn an ordinary moment into something special. But there was a weight between us, too. Something neither of us could name. Some nights, he would almost say something, his voice catching, a sentence left unfinished. I wanted to ask what he was hiding, but I was afraid to break the spell. One night, I heard him crying. It was barely a sound, a sharp inhale, a muffled sob, but it cut through me like ice. I pressed my hand to the door, unsure what to do. "Mason," I whispered, fear threading through my voice. "Are you?" "I'm fine," he said too quickly. "Go." "To sleep, Ella." But I couldn't. Not after that. The next day, I tried to catch his eye at breakfast, but he wouldn't look at me. He left before anyone else, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. At school, the rumors got louder. Someone told me Mason used to run away when things got bad at home. Someone else said his dad had a temper. I didn't know what to believe. That night, I left the door open a little wider. When Mason came, he sat closer. So close I could hear his breathing, steady and real. He didn't say anything for a long time. I waited, counting my own heartbeats. Finally, he whispered, "Sometimes I wish I could disappear." The words lingered in the dark, heavy as stone. I reached my hand through the crack in the door, fingers brushing the air. "You're not alone," I said, voice trembling. "Not anymore." For the first time, Mason didn't flinch away. He let my words hang there, letting them sink in. After a while, he started telling me about his mom, how she used to sing him to sleep when he was little, before everything changed. We stayed like that until the sun started to rise, trading stories and secrets, piecing together the things we'd both lost. That was the night I realized. Sometimes the people who come, the closest are the ones you let in when the rest of the world is asleep. And Mason? He was closer than anyone. If you'd asked me what held our new family together, I probably would have said thin air. It was all just the right words at the right moments, careful silences, 1,000 tiny lies stacked so high you could barely see over them. But every lie has its limit, and every silence eventually cracks. The storm that night was the kind you feel in your bones, lightning slicing the sky, thunder shaking the window panes, rain falling so hard you couldn't hear anything else, except voices. It started in the kitchen. My mom's voice, brittle and sharp. Steve's, low and heavy, breaking up through the floorboards like an earthquake. I sat on my bed, knees hugged to my chest, counting the seconds between thunderclaps, trying to block out the shouting. I could hear Mason's music playing through the wall, too loud for that time of night, his own way of drowning out the world. I thought about texting my old best friend, just to hear someone say my name, but I stopped myself. It would only remind me how far away she was. The shouting grew louder. I heard something crash. A plate, maybe, or a glass. I flinched and closed my eyes. That's when I heard Mason's door open and close, his footsteps crossing the hall. Soft knock at my door, more urgent than usual. "It's me," Mason whispered. He sounded out of breath. I stood up and opened the door just a crack. His face was pale, eyes bright in the shadows. "Can I? Just for a minute?" His voice shook. He'd never asked before. I nodded, and he slipped into my room, closing the door gently behind him. For a second, neither of us spoke. We just listened, our parents' voices rising and falling, the storm battering the roof. Mason sat down on the floor by my bed, back against the wall, pulling his knees up. I sat beside him, hands trembling. "Sorry," he muttered. "It got bad tonight." "It's not your fault," I whispered. He shook his head. "Feels like it is sometimes, like if I hadn't—" He cut himself off, staring hard at the carpet. I waited, not sure if I should say something. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside him. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I used to think if I just kept quiet, everything would be okay. If I just stayed out of the way, nobody would get hurt, but it doesn't work like that." I swallowed hard. My own voice came out small. "I know what you mean." He glanced over at me, a sad little smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah?" I nodded. "Sometimes I feel like I broke everything just by being here. Like maybe Mom would be happier if I'd stayed with Dad, or if I just disappeared." Mason's expression darkened. "Don't say that. You didn't do anything wrong." "Neither did you." We sat in silence, thunder rolling overhead, the house seeming to shrink around us. When the shouting finally faded, we could hear footsteps on the stairs, then the parents' doors closing, 2 slams echoing down the hallway. Mason let out a long breath like he'd been holding it for years. He pressed his hands to his face, elbows on his knees. "I don't want to go back to my room," he said. "Not yet." "Then stay," I told him, surprising myself with how much I meant it. So he did. We didn't talk at first. I watched the lightning flash through the curtains, painting his face in ghostly colors. I wondered how many storms he'd survived before me, how many nights he'd spent alone listening to his father's anger thunder through the house. After a while, Mason spoke. His voice was rough, words tumbling out in a rush like he couldn't hold them back anymore. "My mom left when I was 12. One day she was there, the next. Gone. Dad never talked about it. He just pretended she never existed. I guess I did, too, after a while. It was easier that way." He paused, staring at his hands. "But sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear her singing. She used to sing when the weather was bad. I'd lie in bed and pretend her voice could keep the lightning away." I felt something sharp and sad twist inside me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He shook his head, brushing away tears with the heel of his hand. "It's stupid. I shouldn't even care anymore." "It's not stupid," I said. "You never stop caring, not really. You just learn to hide it." Mason looked up at me, eyes wet but fierce. "You ever wish you could go back? Start over?" "All the time," I said. "But I can't. And neither can you. We're stuck. Here. Together." He laughed, just once. It was more of a sigh. "Yeah. Together." We stayed on the floor for a long time, letting the storm outside and the quiet between us say what words couldn't. The walls didn't seem so high or so thick now that we'd let each other in. Eventually, I got up and grabbed an old quilt from the closet, draping it over us both. Mason didn't protest. He just tucked his chin down, breathing slowly, shoulders finally relaxing. It felt like the house was holding its breath, like everything could shatter or finally settle if we just stayed very, very still. I thought about all the nights I'd spent wishing for someone to break through the silence, someone to be with me when the world felt too loud. I never thought it would be Mason, the boy who barely spoke, the boy who waited until everyone was asleep before showing up at my door. Now he was here. Now I wasn't alone. Before he left, just as the storm was fading, he made me promise, if things ever get bad, you come find me, no matter what. I nodded. Only if you promise the same. He grinned, a real lopsided grin. Deal. When he left, the house felt different. Not perfect, not fixed, but lighter somehow. Like the walls that had held us apart were finally starting to crumble. I lay in bed, listening to the rain soften, replaying every word, every glance. For the first time since moving in, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. Nobody warns you that after a storm, the silence can feel even louder than the thunder. That's how it was the morning, after everything fell apart. The rain was gone, the sky outside that odd shade of post-storm blue, but the air in the house was dense and brittle, like it might shatter if you spoke above a whisper. I found Mom in the kitchen, staring into a cup of cold coffee. She smiled when she saw me, too quickly, too bright, the way people do when they're trying to hide the crack in their voices. Steve was gone. No note, no breakfast plate, just his keys missing from the hook and a heavy, aching space at the table. I wanted to ask where Mason was, but I couldn't. The words felt dangerous, like they might set off another explosion. School was a blur. I drifted through classes, teachers' voices warping in my ears. All I could think about was Mason. Whether he was okay, whether he blamed me for what happened, whether he'd come to my door again. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a message that never came. By the time I got home, the house felt even emptier. I left my backpack by the stairs and wandered through the rooms, listening for any sign of him. Nothing. My heart thudded, heavy and hollow. I finally found him outside, sitting on the old swing in the backyard. He didn't look up when I called his name. I sat on the grass nearby, knees pulled to my chest, waiting for him to speak. For a long time, neither of us did. He rocked back and forth, sneakers digging into the mud. His hair was a mess, eyes red. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded raw, like he'd used it up fighting invisible battles. "They're splitting up," he said. "At least for now. Dad's staying at Uncle Ben's." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." He shook his head, bitter. "Don't be. This was coming for a long time." The swing creaked between us, a lullaby for the broken. I tried to find the right words, but all I could offer was the truth. "I don't want you to leave." He looked at me then. Really looked, like he was searching for something solid to hold on to. "I'm not going anywhere. Not if I can help it." I wanted to believe him. I needed to. That night, the house felt emptier than ever. Mom went to bed early, face puffy from crying. I couldn't sleep. I wandered from room to room, every shadow looking longer, every creak in the floor making my heart jump. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it, a soft tap at my door, gentler than before. My heart leapt, equal parts hope and dread. I opened the door just a little, expecting Mason to be there, slouched and awkward. Instead, he was standing right in the middle of my room, eyes wild, hands shoved into his pockets. "Sorry," he said, voice low. I can't be in my room right now." I nodded and stepped aside, letting him sit on the edge of my bed. It was the first time he'd crossed that threshold without asking, the first time he looked more lost than guarded. He ran his hands through his hair, staring at his feet. What if this is it? What if he doesn't come back? What if we have to move again? His questions tangled in the air, heavy and sharp. I sat beside him, close, but not touching. "Then we figure it out together, okay?" I'm tired of running. He glanced at me, something fierce in his eyes. Promise? Promise, I said, the word steady on my tongue. A silence fell over us. Not the bad kind, not the kind that feels like drowning, but something gentler, like the pause between heartbeats. It felt like a new beginning, the kind you only get after everything breaks. Mason looked around my room, his gaze pausing on the little things, my chipped mug, the stack of books by the window, the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling on my first night here. Do you ever wish we could just hit pause? He asked. Just stop everything for a while and breathe? All the time, I admitted. But life doesn't really work that way. He laughed softly. Yeah, figures. He stretched out on top of the covers, arms crossed behind his head. I lay down too, eyes tracing the shadows on the ceiling. For the first time, I felt safe. Not because the world had gotten easier, but because I wasn't alone in it anymore. We talked in whispers, as if the walls themselves were listening. About the little things, our favorite movies, the songs we played on repeat when we couldn't sleep. But then the conversation turned deeper. Mason's voice trembled. Sometimes I think I'm just like my dad. I get angry and then I shut down. I don't want to be that person, Ella. You're not, I said firmly. You're not him. You're not even close. He didn't answer, but his jaw unclenched, and I could tell he was holding on to my words like a lifeline. A flash of headlights swept across the ceiling. For a moment, we both held our breath, wondering if Steve was coming back, if anything would go back to normal. But the lights faded, just another car passing by. We stayed, like that for hours, half asleep, voices getting softer as the night deepened. Mason told me he was scared of losing everything again, of waking up one morning to find me gone too. I'll still be here, I promised. No matter what. He finally smiled, a real smile, tired and grateful. I believe you. Before he left, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled slip of paper. Here, he said, handing it to me. If you ever need me, like really need me, just text that number. I'll answer, no matter what. I turned the paper over in my hands, warmth blooming in my chest. He paused in the doorway, glancing back. You know, for a long time, I thought letting someone get close was just asking for trouble. But I'm glad you didn't give up on me. I blinked away the sting in my eyes. You waited until I was ready. That's what matters. He left, the door clicking softly behind him. I lay awake, the slip of paper pressed to my heart, listening to the house breathe. Everything was uncertain. Tomorrow, next week, next year. But for the first time, I knew I could face whatever came next, because Mason had promised. And this time, I believed him. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what might happen, but what might not. That's what I realized in the weeks after everything changed. Every morning, I woke up holding my breath, waiting for the next crack, in the fragile piece holding our family together. Sometimes it was a slammed door, sometimes a phone call that ended in tears. But sometimes there was laughter at breakfast, or the sound of Mom humming to herself in the kitchen. Every day was a balancing act. I learned to live with uncertainty. Mason did too. He started spending less time hiding in his room and more time out in the open. Sometimes shooting hoops in the driveway, sometimes sitting with me on the porch steps. The silence between us easier now, less afraid. We never talked much about what had happened that night. The storm had passed, but the air between us stayed charged with all the things we'd shared. We didn't need words. Our promise was enough. But life, as always, refused to hit pause. It was a Thursday when everything shifted again. I came home from school to find Mom and Steve sitting at the kitchen table, voices low and tense. Mason stood in the hallway, his jaw set. The look in his eyes told me everything before anyone spoke. Ella, can you come here for a minute? Mom asked, her voice too gentle, too careful. I glanced at Mason. He nodded, barely. Mom's hands were folded tightly in front of her. Steve and we've decided to keep living apart for now, just until things settle down. I know it's not what anyone wanted, but we think it's best. For everyone. Steve cleared his throat, looking everywhere but at us. I'll be at Ben's for a while. You'll still see Mason, of course. We'll make it work. I heard the words, but my brain felt numb. I looked at Mason, searching for anger or fear, but all I saw was tired resignation. He'd expected this. We're okay, Mom, I said quietly. We'll figure it out. She reached out, squeezing my hand. I'm proud of you. Both of you. Steve looked at Mason, 1,000 things unspoken in his eyes. You'll always have a place, son. Don't ever forget that. Mason nodded, face unreadable. The moment hung in the air, then drifted away like smoke. That night, the house felt less like a battleground and more like an empty stage after the show's over. I wandered through the dark, missing the days when everything was simple, even if I'd never realized it then. I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard footsteps. My heart skipped. The sound was so familiar now that I smiled before I even saw him. Mason paused in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. You awake? I nodded, pulling the blanket up to my chin. Can't sleep. He closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, just like that other night. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Tomorrow's my last day here for a while, he finally said. Dad wants me to stay with him. Just for a couple weeks, he says, until things settle. My throat tightened. You're leaving? He shrugged. Just for a bit. I'll be back. Besides, you have my number, remember? I fumbled for the slip of paper on my nightstand, holding it tight. You promised, I whispered. He smiled, a real warm smile. I always keep my promises. A silence settled between us, thick with everything we didn't want to say. I wanted to ask if he was scared. I wanted to tell him how much I'd miss our late-night talks, the comfort of knowing he was just on the other side of the door. Instead, I said, Do you remember the first night you waited outside my room? I thought you were a ghost. He laughed, quiet and surprised. You looked terrified. I was, I admitted. But not of you, of everything. He nodded, eyes soft. Me too. We sat together, watching the moonlight slip across the floor. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. It felt like a friend now, gentle and familiar. Mason leaned back, propping himself up on his elbows. You know, you're braver than you think, I snorted. Me? Hardly. He shook his head. You could have shut me out. You could have made this all so much harder, but you didn't. You let me in. My eyes prickled. You let me in too. I think we saved each other. The next morning, Mason's bag was by the door. Steve pulled up in his old pickup, engine rumbling. Mason hugged Mom, a little awkward, and shook my hand with a grin that was all mischief and sadness. See you soon, Elle, he said, using the nickname only he ever called me. You better, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Before he left, he pressed something into my palm, a folded piece of notebook paper. Don't read it until tonight, he said, grinning. Promise? I nodded, blinking back tears. Then he was gone, the sound of the truck fading into the morning. The house felt different without him. Not empty, exactly, but quieter. I drifted through the day, listless, checking my phone every few minutes even, though I knew he wouldn't text yet. That night, I lay in bed and finally opened the note. Mason's handwriting was messy, rushed. Elle, if you're reading this, I'm probably missing you already. Don't let Mom drive you crazy, okay? And don't stop leaving the door open a crack. I know things are weird. I know you're scared sometimes. Me too, but you're not alone. Not ever. If you need me, you know how to find me. I'll be back before you know it. And until then, just remember, family isn't always about who's under the same roof. Sometimes it's about who shows up in the dark, just close enough to let you know you matter. See you soon, kid. Emma read it twice, then pressed it to my chest, eyes burning. I thought about all the nights I'd spent alone, all the storms I'd survived, all the walls I'd built around myself. Mason had waited until I was ready. Waited until I was in bed. Until the world was quiet and the dark couldn't scare me anymore. Now, even with him gone, I could feel him there. Just outside the door. Just close enough. I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle over me, full of promise instead of fear. I wasn't alone. I never would be again. And in that quiet, hopeful space, I finally let myself dream of tomorrow, of Mason coming home, of the strength we'd found in each other, closer than ever, even across the miles, even in the dark. The end.